สวัสดีครับคุณอารอนมาเชล
Hello.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming to Thailand.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate it. This is my second time here in Bangkok, and it feels good to be back in Thailand. So, thank you so much.
Okay, we have so many questions about your playing guitar, about your new model.
Yes.
Okay, let's go for the first one. Can you share me about your music background a little bit, and how did you develop your style?
Yeah. So, I'm certainly a child of like rock and metal, of course. When I was younger, I sort of got into guitar with, Green Day, Blink-182,
Wow.
like this type of stuff, of course.
So different style.
Yeah, definitely. But it also informs, to a degree, like some of my sensibilities. I think based on my age, that's what was popular at the time when I started becoming interested in guitar, and I sort of went from that to getting into probably some more like punk-based stuff. Like I was growing up going to like the Warped Tour and seeing like everything from a lot of pop punk to more serious punk bands like Anti-Flag and Bad Religion and Pennywise and like AFI and stuff like that. So I think like that combined with the pop punk stuff was where I sort of started, and then I probably would have found some early metal stuff probably through Avenged Sevenfold and Atreyu and bands like that for sure. But at the same time, like my dad has a really good taste in music, and while I was like getting into guitar, he would play me the stuff that he likes. And he's not a musician, but he has very good taste in guitar music, so we would be listening to a lot of like Pat Metheny and George Benson and Wes Montgomery and Lee Ritenour. So like sort of like flipping between like contemporary jazz stuff and like a little bit of traditional jazz stuff, but that's never really been what interests me on guitar. Like I have an appreciation for it, but even like especially then I didn't really know how to like hear and appreciate that. What Pat does, for example, really spoke to me. I think like I always kind of was drawn towards like a very vocal guitar style. All of that is to say, like as a young person growing up in like pop punk and rock and metal and stuff, and then like listening to some guitar music, I guess I tried to connect the dots later by, I guess I would have found Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, Paul Gilbert, and these types of players. That was cool to me too. Really guitar forward music was also really cool to me too. But I was certainly more interested in contemporary, like modern metal and stuff like that. So, I went from listening to discovering, Avenged Sevenfold and Atreyu and stuff in like Guitar World magazine to then maybe finding like Meshuggah and
Is it really changed?
Yeah, like System of a Down and Linkin Park and like it's like all kinds of stuff like that at that time. And then towards the end of high school and stuff, I think I started to find progressive metal, which to me really spoke to me because it's like you could put it all together. There's a band from Canada local to me where I'm from in Toronto called Protest the Hero, where they're a very notable band in the sense that they were the closest thing to me that were doing this sort of style of like a hybrid of like punk and metal, and it's technical and it's fast and it's melodic, and like to me that was like, okay, I think I get it because you can do it all, so everything I appreciate about all the genres that I grew up on and everything I like about technical modern metal comes together, and there's kind of no rules. So to me that's like where my inspiration comes from, and it's like where the sound is sort of born from, is like that amalgamation of like all these different things, which is kind of why Interval sounds the way it does, which is like high energy guitar forward music, but with like a little bit of a more of a contemporary like pop punk and metal edge to it and stuff. Yeah.
Back to 2011 from your first EP.
Yep.
What is the concept? Because it's very different style from now.
Yes.
Very, very. Also because in this album is so many things like a progressive, like a Djent style.
Yep.
How about the concept?
So at that time, I think like I would have been coming from playing in like local bands, and at that time I was playing in a local band that our sound was very much, I described Protest the Hero, we were trying to do that thing, try to sound like Between the Buried to me, things like that. And I had got my first laptop and a little Pod XT the little red bean and yeah, and like recording.
Just this.
Yeah, that's it. Like, 2009. Yeah, like recording yourself was kind of new then, and at least it was to me anyway. Like that was sort of the beginning. The idea of programming drums was so new and stuff. So I found obviously guys like what Misha was doing with early Periphery and the Bulb stuff, and like John Brown and Ackle. This is pre-Monuments, pre-Tesseract. This is, Fell Silent, like back in the day. I discovered that kind of music through the internet. And I was just sort of intrigued by the idea that you could compose and write your own music as a single, like one person, because that style sort of came from the early djent sound. Like I was fascinated by that, and that influenced the beginning of what Intervals was ultimately, which is, me trying to see if I could do that. So that's where the Space Between and In Time sort of came from. But admittedly, Intervals is a bit of an accident. I never really sat down and said, this is what I want to do. It's like, it's not very calculated. Like I just started putting out music by myself on the internet, and I just happened to call it Intervals. I actually think that I would have done things a lot differently if I was hiding behind the scenes, thinking, trying to be calculated, For me, it's like I put some music out and there was some interest in the internet, very small community of people were embracing it and enjoying it. And I just sort of have always been trying to continue doing what I was just figuring it out. I've kind of just been making mistakes along the way in front of everybody. That's how it feels to me. So the sound absolutely has changed quite a bit over the years. I think there was a really drastic shift coming from those records. Of course, off camera before we did the interview, you mentioned you really like A Voice Within. I mean, I'm very proud of that record too. That was sort of an opportunity to see if writing conventional music with a vocalist was what I wanted to do. It was a bit of an experiment more than anything. I'm very proud of that record and everything, but I think it more than anything, it taught me that instrumental music is the most honest to me in regards to intervals. The Shape of Color was a bit of a me taking the pendulum and sort of swinging it in the other direction, because I felt like I was maybe starting to get too comfortable with the idea of tuning my guitars down and constantly playing this more djent-based sound. Of course, I wanted to see if I could push myself as a guitar player, take away some of these things that I thought I was maybe relying on, like tuning down and doing things like that. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could write guitar music in standard tuning, and also an experiment, all of it's an experiment, so the sound has changed a lot. I think now with Circadian and now more recently with Memory Palace, I truly believe that the sound is now starting to balance out, and it's like a combination of the sound I started to explore during The Shape of Color and The Way Forward, but also now informed by the early sound, where it's a little more aggressive again, it's a little more deeper, darker, down-tuned, a little more heavy, but combining what I've learned along the way about being, highly melodic and taking everything and blending it all together. So
for the next album, 2012, it's still I want to say something like a progressive and DJ style, but you change everything with a voice within.
Yeah, sure.
How about the concept for this album, and how did you compose this song? So because it's so different from the previous album.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's actually that different. I think if you listen to In Time and then if you listen to A Voice Within, and reluctantly I released the instrumental version of A Voice Within afterwards, I had to be convinced to do it because the music was never composed for that sound. The difference is A Voice Within was composed to be a conventional album with a vocalist. But aesthetically though, A Voice Within is not that much different than the sound from In Time. I think I might have left a little more room for the vocals. I think aesthetically the sound fits. I think it's a logical extension of the In Time sound, and then obviously the approach changed because, listen, if I wrote a bunch of songs and I played guitar over every space and then I was like, oh, let's put vocals on them, I don't think that's that's not very inclusive of the vocalist. There was definitely a deliberate choice to make more conventional songs that have a vocalist. But when you remove the vocals and you listen to that instrumentally and you compare it to A Voice Within, or pardon me, compare it to In Time, it's relatively the same. The difference is just the choices made on who is the focal point, what is the focal point. But audibly, the band feels relatively the same. The sound is the same tuning, same approach to riffing.
Yeah.
It still fits in that like early djent wave. Like it definitely makes sense. But no, my approach there, like the inspiration, the concept was to do what we were doing, but to make room up the middle for the vocals, and a lot of my guitar lines as well on that record also play in with the vocals as well. But that's not strange to me because what I do with my guitar is functioning as the vocal, because if you look at everything that came before it, I think within time, maybe I played a little bit less lead. Like there was like a good amount, but this is what I sort of mean at the beginning. One of your first questions there was like, intervals is an accident. Those early recordings are me just like trying to figure out what I'm doing. I just happen to do it with an audience. I think a lot of people test their sound out and they get to practice and try a bunch of things and work out their sound, and then they release music at some point, make their big debut, and this is my first album. This is how I want to sound. But for me, I just started putting videos on the internet, and I'm lucky enough to have created a following, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I made a lot of mistakes in front of people, and while those albums are maybe seen as some of my like seminal, important early works, like to me, I'm still figuring it out, even to this day. So I think that the way I sound now is informed by all of that, I think the most drastic shift was going from that to The Shape of Color. I think that was the biggest change in sound. But then from that point on now, I think that the arc is more like the graph is more linear now. It's like you can actually see from Shape of Color to The Way Forward, there was like an evolution, an expansion there. And then Circadian and Memory Palace are like a really fine balance of the early sound and the new sound.
So, it's very incredible about this album. It's very wow. So I mean, I feel wow with the sound, with your playing and the vocalist line.
Yeah,
it's really perfect.
Thank you. We put a lot of work into it. I mean, I'm proud of all of my works. A lot of people will from time to time ask, what's your favorite? I can't. They're all my creations. They're all my children. It's like I can't choose a favorite. I'm proud of all of it. I think that early on, I was definitely like trying to figure it out, and I think that there's some holes in my game when I look back but at the same time, like we all have to sort of start somewhere. I just happened to put out some music that became like the beginning of my career, but like that wasn't by design. It wasn't deliberate,
So for the as you mentioned to The Shape of Color and Circadian, both of these albums, it seems like the more melodic line, more the pop line.
Yes.
How come the idea for this?
Yeah, that comes from me just trying to continue refining what I'm doing and trying to sort of get better at what I think makes intervals different and what gives us our identity, is this sort of approach that my opinion is that modern guitar music can be relatively alienating in the sense that if it's too much and whether that's the actual playing itself or the structure of the music, the way it moves, a lot of the time you'll hear no repeating parts, the structure is a little unconventional. Like I think what I'm trying to do is make instrumental guitar music that's inclusive for the listener and has like a really clear-cut identity. So I think when I started doing that with The Shape of Color, since it was the answer to A Voice Within, it came afterwards, I know that that's where I could tell there was a shift in the way people perceived the music. In fact, while A Voice Within was successful, The Shape of Color was truly when intervals became more powerful as an instrumental band because, so if I look at that and I say, okay, what was different here? Well, that's when the approach to the more highly melodic sound started. So from that point on, I've tried to get better and better and better at writing more cohesive songs where the melodic identity is the focus.
So when I listen to your music, I kind of sing along.
Yeah.
With a melody line.
Yes.
This is a beautiful thing.
It's deliberate. Yes. 100%.
Okay, for the new album, Memory Palace.
Yes.
It seems like you put the more like a drum electronic.
Correct.
Why?
Because I think that Well, first of all, I'm inspired by electronic music, and I have been for a long time. I've been trying to figure out how to get the sound to this place because Intervals is a modern band, but we're still on recording. We're still a very like organic band in the sense that, you know, you have a live drum kit and you have a bunch of guitars and sounds that are more like expected from the genre. Whereas to me, the master plan, like the sound in my head is a combination of like modern electronic music with, you know, still the live band at the core of the sound, but with more production around it to embellish it, you know, more sound design, whether it's synths or, you know, yeah, there's more electronic drums. I mean, I even collaborated with some artists that that's their forte. That's what they bring to the table. You know, track one is a collaboration with Cone Sound, who are a drum and bass duo from the UK, where they make very intelligent instrumental based, you know, drum and bass music, you know, and I love that sound. I love, you know, modern break beats, and like I've been trying to figure out how to like pull that into the interval sound. Like one of my biggest influences from a melodic standpoint and the way the songs are composed is a Australian outfit called Pendulum, which is, you know, electronic music. So yeah, it's just like naturally more and more of that is starting to find its way. Also on Circadian, I really like started to go there a little bit, but I not so much with the electronic drums, but with synths and things like that. And then throughout, you know, the quiet years of the pandemic, I wanted to get better at sound design. So it's what I'm interested in, and it's just like I want to have more of that in the sound. So yeah.
From your all of the song,
Yep.
which song that you want the student or young guitar player want to learn and practice and analyze?
Again, hard for me to choose. They're all my children, you know, so I'll give you one from each album. I'd say that you know, maybe from The Shape of Color, I think a nice place to start might be, well, a lot of people really like I'm Awake. I think that song, like, you know, the riff is really challenging. I think from a rhythmic standpoint, you know, the opening riff will really kind of like whip you into shape. It'll get the right hand trained to play 16th notes and percussive, you know, palm muting and, you know, string skipping and things like that. But Sure Shot, track 2 is also a really fun place to start as like maybe a beginner song or something like that. You know, it's like a really straight ahead, easy song to play, I think. Maybe there's some challenging lines in it, but that's cool. From the way forward, track 1 as well, Touch and Go is a fun place to be. Impulsively Responsible, I think that's track 2. So track 1 and 2 from both records are great, I'd say. Circadian, I think a really nice place to start is track 1 as well. 5-HTP is a good time, and it's really straight ahead and highly melodic. Some challenging lines in there for sure, but, you know, pretty to the point, very straight ahead. On the new album, anything. I'd say, you know, if you have a 7-string, Neurogenesis is really fun. There's a track called Circuit Bender, which is really fun. That's a cool one. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say just get a tab book and learn what you like. If there's a song in the catalog that you like, you know, start there and see if you can get your hands around.
Okay, I love your song, Breathe.
Oh yeah, the little interlude. Yeah.
So I love the vibe. I love the reverb.
Thank you.
Could you give me some advice how to practice the rhythmic?
Well, I mean, I would just say, you know, like a lot of what I do with intervals isn't necessarily like, I'm not reinventing the wheel, so to speak, you know. Technique isn't at this, there are some technical things that I do for sure, you know, but it's not the reason I make music. You know, for some guys, technique, like being technical is the point. For me, that's not the point. The point is to write songs and to create the vibe first. But your question is about practice. I mean, really at the end of the day, I think it's just about, you know, taking things slowly. I practice the hard stuff the same way I practice the easy stuff, which is, you know, tethered to the metronome, making sure that you understand how time functions. And if something is hard and fast, you got to slow it down and you got to work it slow. And, you know, maybe you do 20, 30 BPM slower and play it the same way slow, the same way that you play it fast, and really take your time. And if something's giving you a hard time, if it's a part that's like you just can't play, you need to be honest with yourself about what that part is. That's what I do. I have all kinds of stuff, you know. Some nights I'll play things flawlessly, and then some nights I'll play a song and something's not coming out right, and then tomorrow at sound check or at rehearsal I need to be honest with myself. What is that? Slow it down. Why is that part kicking my butt, you know? And then I need to I need to sort of grapple with that and say, oh, it's because I'm overthinking this one part, or I keep rushing the pull off here or the hammer on here. You need to think about that, and you need to make sure that it's tethered to the timing, So take your time, play things slow, practice things the same way slowly that you would play them fast.
As we know, you're such a god of slide.
I don't know about God, but there's definitely some sliding going on
It's
for
really
sure.
True, 100%.
Oh.
How did you develop it? How come the idea of the influence?
Yeah, well, that's the inspiration. Like we were talking about early inspirations, like Pat Metheny.
From Pat.
100%. Yeah, think about it. Like that single note vocal line, like slurring in and out of the notes. That's the difference between simply just playing notes on the fingerboard and sounding more vocal. And that's it right there. Think about how vocalists sounds when they sing. Vocalists don't have frets, right? It's fluid, right? So, you would slide into a note, you would dip out of a note, I'm trying to emulate that sound.
For the next question, how did you join with Schecter?
Schecter reached out to me in 2021, and the timing was really good because I was sort of looking to find a home for, a company to work with to develop an instrument. It wasn't so much a priority for me, but I had spent some time away from previous relationships, and I've had a journey over many years with lots of guitars in my collection and some close relationships with a few companies. When they reached out, I thought the timing was good and the opportunity seemed nice. I have a few colleagues and friends, one of them who I'm here with, Nick Johnston, of course, who's been with the company for a long time, and I know of the company's reputation. The USA Custom Shop is incredible, so I know the guitars are fantastic. I'm also friendly with Keith Marrow, and I've known Jeff Loomis for a number of years, just as an acquaintance. The opportunity just seemed natural, and for me, working with a guitar company is about the people and how they do business, and because in 2024 guitars are amazing. Most guitars are amazing. I think you'd have a harder time finding a bad guitar. So yeah, when they reached out, the timing was lovely, and they presented me with an opportunity to develop a signature guitar, and it's been amazing. Now we're in 2024. Here we are. So Diamond Series and USA. It's amazing.
As we know, you play so many guitar brands.
Sure.
Like a Millionaires, like a blah blah blah. How is different from Schecter? So I mean, this your model signature AM-6 and AM-7.
Yep.
How is different from that?
Well, they're not necessarily different. It's just that they're the ones that I've had, influence over their design, and they're informed by everything that I've played leading into that. It's almost as if everything coming before that was research, So, no, they're wonderful. I mean, they're really purpose built, straight ahead. They're just designed to do exactly what I like, which is these days, actually, it's based on less. It's about minimalism. It's not about having 7 materials and 11 pieces in the neck and all this stuff, a bunch of exotic woods and all that. The idea is to be straight ahead and to the point, 2-3 materials, well-built pickup, just basic and right, to the point, gets the job done, So yeah, that's kind of the idea, is that they're informed by everything that I like about modern guitar.
For your new guitar signature,
Yep.
as we know, you change the style a little bit.
Yes.
Like a color, like
Yep.
a finish.
Yep.
Why this time you change color, and why you choose the satin finish?
Well, there's a few different things going on. So when Schecter brought me on, I was invited to design a Diamond Series first, which, we put out the first 2, which was the Arctic Jade and the Cobalt Slate. That was the AM-6 and AM-7 Diamond Series with the Wenge neck. And, there was a thing that I was going for there. I had some limitations with what I could choose. So I wanted to take the classic headstock and flip it, do the reverse tilt back, Wenge neck, these types of things. The matte finish one that you're talking about, the blue one, is just a new color and a new take on the AM-6. It's the only difference is that it has a maple neck, but everything else about it is the same. The USA guitars, the body is slightly different. It's not a carved top body.
Okay.
It's a slight radius to the body. Yes. And that's because, given the opportunity to move from the Diamond Series to the US, there was less limitation. I could have more influence over the design. So I chose that body because it is a little closer to what I like. I like a carved top body. That's also fine. But things are slightly changing and I wanted to iterate on that. So it was also important that I have a one-piece neck. The compromise there was to do a one-piece neck. We couldn't do the tilt back reverse headstock, so I decided to do traditional 6-in-line, quarter sawn, one-piece neck. That's really important for stability and for tone, of course. I think that a one-piece neck sounds the best. So we sort of like modernized that headstock by doing the custom tuning heads. You'll notice it has these really nice barrel tuners on it, which is cool. It gives my guitar a unique touch. The body has a really subtle kind of radius to it as well. And I wanted to do, you know, some nice Pantones, very solid colors on those as well, because I just think it's a nice basic approach that looks clean, minimal, looks good on stage. And my whole design approach with these guitars is to be clean and minimal to start, so that as we iterate, we can enhance and go from there. So once we do figured tops, scrape bindings, natural back, all these things, you know, figured necks and things, that we didn't start fancy. We started basic and then we, you know, go from there. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
So you know, I love your inlay very much.
Yes, me too. Me too. Very simple.
Okay, for the last one, last video you world-class guitar player, right? What is the most important thing that musician, guitar player should pay attention, but they are not?
Songs. I'm less concerned with the playing. I think, of course, it goes without saying that in modern guitar music, it's important to play a certain way because the listener or the fan of this style wants to be excited by what you play. I think that goes without saying. But I think the difference between obscure guitar music and the music that connects with people is the attention to the identity of your song. I think it's about song structure. I think it's about getting to the point. I think it's about songs having something to say rather than being a combination of a bunch of riffs and just playing on top like it's a backing track. I think it's about being inclusive of the entire band and the composition, the arrangement. So that's what matters to me, for sure. And I think that's what players should think about. That would be my advice, I suppose, you know, is to think about the identity of your music and prioritize the songs, you know.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
I appreciate it.
และนี่นะครับก็คือบทสัมภาษณ์ของคุณ Aaron Marshall นะครับที่เราจะได้ความรู้มากมายเลยนะครับแล้วก็รอติดตามอัลบั้มใหม่ๆกีตาร์รุ่นใหม่ๆนะครับและครั้งนี้นะครับกีตาร์ไทยต้องขอบพระคุณ Schecter นะครับและบริษัท Intermusic นะครับ Asian Music ที่ให้โอกาสเราได้สัมภาษณ์คุณ Aaron Marshall นะครับเทปนี้ผมกับคุณ Aaron Marshall ลาไปก่อนนะครับแล้วรอชมเทปหน้านะครับว่าผมจะพาไปสัมภาษณ์ศิลปินท่านไหนนะครับเทปนี้ลาไปแล้วครับสวัสดีครับ
Thank you so much.